Great. Good morning, Chevra. Good Erev Shabbos. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. As we continue our Shir B'Siyata D'Shmaya, traveling through Sefer Likutei Moharan in the middle of Torah and Hay, which we began this week and we will continue into next week. Today's Shir is sponsored by Zev Klein, nishmas, his parents, Rivka, Bryndel, Simcha, and Ya'akov, and Yeshayihu. Also for shidduchim, for Yehudis, Adina, Elisheva, Rochel, Dovid, ben Fayga, Kayla, Yonatan, Shimon, ben Hadassah, Ronit, Netanel, ben Meechal, Dovid, ben Ya'el, and Noach, Avram, and Erez-Eizov, Zev, ben Rivka, Bryndel, and all of Klal Yisrael, and anonymously nishmas, Esther Bas Blanca, Rochel, like her namesake, an exemplar of true royalty, and by Shlomi Pines and Zchus for Esther Shaina Bas Miriam, Zev, and also dedicated as a Zchus for Shlema for Chaim Yehoshua and Chaim Miriam. Also sponsored anonymously the Zchus Chaim ben Peril and his wife Passel ben Bluma Peril and his children to be Zeichel Hamshech Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. A very special tzaddik, a very, very special tzaddik. Unbelievable. What a privilege. What a privilege. Okay, fantastic. I usually make a bracha on the video, and I made a bracha earlier because my throat is a little bit hoarse this morning, so don't judge. I made a bracha already. Okay. Let's continue the Ezras Hashem with Torah and Hay. I believe that we finished yesterday Eis Hay, and we're ready to start Eis Vav and to carry on from there. And we have been learning about the incredible way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects the tzaddik, paradoxically, by perpetrating what would appear to be an injustice against the tzaddik and allowing the Rasha to continue his attack against the tzaddik, therefore giving the tzaddik a nisayan, entrusting the tzaddik with that nisayan. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows that the tzaddik will be able to withstand the challenge and will be able to judge favorably, and therefore maintain his positive perspective, maintain the consciousness that the tzaddik needs in order to live in a perspective of Tov Ayin. And that's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects the tzaddik by holding back the din, causing a shadow, and that shadow is what is the shade in which the tzaddik is seeking refuge, and it also darkens the ra'ayin of the Rasha in the same measure. We learned a bunch of beautiful remazim to that. Yesterday, we were learning a remez in Para Aduma about Para, which is the aspect of tefillah that the Zohar Kodesh says receives from Shar, which is eyesight, right? That's going to enable the tzaddik to daven. Is Aduma Tmima, is as a result of the Aduma, which is harsh judgment, that is Tmima, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is holding back. It becomes a Shar Tam, it's Dina Rafia. We don't see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bringing down strong din on the Rasha. That's Aduma Tmima. And then, Ashaloi Allah, Allah Al, that's a reference to Emunah. That's a reference to Shloime Emunah Yisrael, like we learned, the Bechin of Malchus, of Nukva, of Ze'er Ha'ampin, and there you have the aspect of Emunah, which is the Yashris Halev that enables the tzaddik to maintain his Emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In order to daven properly, we learned that there's Afar and Efer, right? Efer was the Bechina of trampling the Ra Shebefrat, and Ra Shebechlal. Afar was the aspect to be mikash ourselves, both to the tzaddikim sheichne afar, as well as, this was a mind-blowing, incredible thing, as well as to be able to be mikasher ourselves to ourselves in a previous Gilgal. To realize this is not the totality of me. This is a part of me that's manifesting in this lifetime. But there are other chelkei nefesh, ruach, and neshama of mine that are already mitukan, and they're already tachas kisei hakavod, and I need to draw from them the confidence of being able to know that I too, in this lifetime, will absolutely for sure be able to fix up whatever I need to fix up, and I will not come back again in this way, right? And those chalakim will go back, and they will take their rightful place. And what a beautiful thing to know that when I stand up to daven, it's not only me davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Myself, I'm davening along with all the tzaddikim with whom I have a connection. All the tzaddikim who I look toward for guidance, who I look toward to be able to give me the advice necessary to really live in this world and to transcend all the challenges and obstacles and to live with emunah. And I am davening with the previous iterations of my own self that I'm rousing to tefillah, to say we're all in this together, we're all part of one entity. Don't leave me hanging over here, right? I need help. I'm struggling. I need help. And so we're all going to do this together, and together storm the Kisei HaKavod, storm the heavenly abode, and bring our tefillahs up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that was the bechina of tzaddikim, beinanim, risha'im. The beinani is the one who's davening, Risha'im is the aspects that we want to subjugate in both Iskafia and Ishapcha. That was Rasha. That was Efer Shebefrat and Efer Shebechlal. And then tzaddikim is I need to be mekasher myself to tzaddikim, and that's why Avram Avinu said, as he's davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, alti ledaber el Hashem va'anoichi afar ve'efer. In order to daven, you need these two elements, afar ve'efer. So now we continue be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach with Ois Vav, and the tzaddik says, Gam tzarech lesakim b'tfilasai b'chinas shalosh kolos. A person needs to be mesakin in his tefillah an aspect of three voices. B'chinas kol ksil b'rayv tvarim. There's a pasuk in Geheles that refers to a negative voice that's associated with the fool. Kol ksil b'rayv tvarim. A fool speaks too much, keeps on talking, and doesn't have the wisdom to be able to maintain silence, to be able to learn, to be able to listen, and is just always giving opinions without wanting to absorb more information that's going to be necessary to bolster and to buttress that worldview. And that's kol ksil b'rayv dvarim. That's number one. Ubechinas. Then there's another aspect of a negative kol, which is kol anois anoichi shemea. That's the aspect of Moshe Rabbeinu coming down from the mountain and knowing that something happens. He wasn't sure what he's hearing, and then he says, "No, kol anois anoichi shemea." This is a sound of negativity. This is something that's that's troublesome, right? And there's trouble afoot. Bechinas kol, and there's another aspect of kol, which is the third. Bechinas kol hayoyim klimasi negdi. The entire day, my shame is opposite me. Mikol mecharif umegadif. On account of the kol, the voice of mecharif umegadif, of the one who is embarrassing and shaming the tzaddik. So we have these three kinds of kol. Okay, we have kol ksil, the voice of the fool b'rayv dvarim. Stam is just a voice of folly. We have kol anois, which is a voice of suffering, and then we have kol hayoyim klimasi, which is the voice of mecharif umegadif. And I was thinking it's not so precise. I was even wondering whether to mention this because I have to work it out a little bit more. I don't want to be a kol ksil b'rayv dvarim, but it just occurred to me as I'm reading this in the shadow, in the better metaphor, in the basking in the light still of Taran and Dalid, right, which we just came out of, and we spent so much time, so our minds are still on Dalid, that it's possible perhaps to suggest that these three things correlate to the three assaults on Malchus, which was represented by David HaMelech in the form of Naval, Avshalom, and Shimi ben Gera. So it's not super precise, but I'm thinking in my mind that perhaps Kol Ksil B'Rayv Dvarim is Avshalom. That's the least precise. I have to really figure out how to connect those two things. I'm thinking Kol Anois was Naval, right, who prevented David HaMelech from having the food he needed. So that was a Kol that made him oppressed. And then Kol Yim Klimasi Negdi, Mikol Mecharif Megadav is very obviously Shimi ben Gera, right, who was attacking David HaMelech with his curses and with his, his putting him to shame. So the Avshalom connection is not super clear. Avshalom was an assault on Malchus from the standpoint of wanting kingship, right, of challenging the king. Okay, it's not so precise as the other ones, but I think the other ones are, and it's instructive because everything we're learning here is, again, about Malchus, right? Like we learned, find those parts within you that are already mitukan, right? The ability to daven properly, to subjugate the ra. What's the ra? Ra'ayin. That's exactly what we learned about in Taran and Dalet. So again, you're able to see the close connection between the Torahs as you move from lesson to lesson. And again, it's possible to suggest that these three things correlate to those three things. But be that as it may, again, we're learning this Torah in the context of Para Aduma. We already had a remez to Para Aduma, well, a few remezim to Para Aduma, because Afar and Efer didn't need to come out of the air, right? That was related to Para Aduma, right? Where we burn the Para Aduma along with these other things, which we're about to learn now. And that was connected to the pasuk that introduced Para Aduma, which is Para Aduma Tmima Asher Lo Allah Aleha Al. So here we're going to come to more symbols and what they mean. And this is mamish just remarkable. And by the way, it also, what we're about to learn is mamish parallel to what we learned in Torah and Dalet. It's really remarkable the way these two things mirror each other. Okay, so let's jump into it. It says the Heilige Tzaddik, Zehu bechinas eitz Erez-Eizov-Shni Tolaas hanemer b'para. Part of the ceremony of preparing the ashes of the Para Aduma was to take these three elements, which is an eitz erez, that's the cedar tree, right? Wood from a cedar tree, the eizov, and small little hyssop grasses, ushni Tolaas, as well as a scarlet string, and they would throw that into the fire and burn it up. Now, why does this sound very familiar? Because these very same things are used in the purification process of the Mitzvah. Whoa. What's the Mitzvah? We just came off of Torah and Dalit. We were speaking the whole time about Lashon Hara, Ayin Hara. So isn't that incredible that the Para Aduma that we're learning over here, that Rabbi Nachman uses as a symbol, right, to go ahead and to subjugate the rishos of the injustice of the Rasha, which is Ra'ayin, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates for him Aduma Tamima, to give him the Nisayan necessary for him to then go ahead and to overcome the Nisayan, to stay in Toiv Ayin, and that's all wrapped up into Para Aduma, is going to mirror exactly in its elements, it's going to mirror Mitzvah, right? Because these two things are connected. Torah and Dalit, Torah and Hey are connected, and now we're going to learn much more deeply what these three elements are. Hanemar Bepara. Okay, here we go. People who are very tall need to make themselves very strong for this paragraph. And we need to say from the outset, it is not talking about you. It's talking about somebody else. I don't think we have very tall people here anyway. Okay, but anybody who's listening to this, Chas v'Shalom is not speaking about them. The Rebbe says something very sharp here about tall people. That's a bit curious. But we cannot blame Rabbi Nachman alone, because there are other tzaddikim who say the same thing. And the Vilna Gaon writes the same thing. And there are others as well. It comes from Kadmoinim, the following idea, but let's assume it's speaking about people who are so tall that we don't even know anybody like that. Says the Heilige Tzaddik, Erez-Eizov-Shni Tolaas. The cedar tree that's mighty and tall is the aspect of counteracting Kol Ksil B'Roiv Dvarim. This voice of the Ksil, that's the Pegam of Roiv Dvarim, where it's producing endless, mindless speech. Beroiv hanhagas ve'emunas kaisvais. Rabbi Nachman translates that and tells us what this means is a person who has so much emunah that they believe in every shtus in the world. Shehi mechinas darchei hamayri. This is the aspect of Darchei Hamayri, which I mentioned in passing in the beginning of Torah and Dalid, where we learned about the necessity to believe that there are remazim in everything, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending us hints, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is guiding our lives. That for sure. But Darchei Hamayri means you can take that to such a degree where literally every tiny thing I'm darshaning now, right, and I'm coming up with all shtiyot in my head that are going to make me, cause me to live my life based on what I'm seeing, and become extremely superstitious because I believe that And that can be a huge pegam. And that's why we learned in the beginning of Torah and Dalid that although there's the bechin of tefillin, which was hagdalas hamoichin, to be able to understand the remazim, what needed to precede tefillin? Tzitzis. What was tzitzis? The bechina of? The bechina of gevura, of tzimtzum, of tcheles, right? Of being able to be mitzamtzim so that I can do this thing in a healthy way. Otherwise, it'll look like emunah. It ends up being mamish emunas kaizvius. It ends up being darchei hamayri. And that's ksil. Why is that ksil? Because the pasuk says ki pes iyam and l'chol davar. Because a fool is somebody who just believes everything. He's gullible. Everything he believes. V'zeh b'chinas erez. This is the aspect of the cedar tree. B'chinas, the pasuk in Amos, which says va'anoichi yishmadati es hamayri. I destroyed the Amorites, the Amori, Asher kigvaya arozim gavai, who were as tall as cedars. So this links Amori to cedars. Okay, but how do we come back to the pasuk called Ksil B'Roiv Dvarim? So he already made the loose connection theoretically between Ksil and Darchei Hamayri, because a Ksil is somebody who believes everything, and a Pesi is Yaman L'chol Davar, and that's Darchei Hamayri, which reflects their superstition of the way that they lived. But here the Rebbe gets even more specific, and here he says quite a shocking thing, so much so that I have an exclamation point next to it, because I learned this years ago and was very surprised to see this. Says that Tzaddik v'hagvoye koyma al pi haroiv im ksilim. He says tall people are generally fools. He says, now again, you have to know how tall. I'm saying it doesn't mean tall people. He said tall people are very, very bright. But he says there's a klal. Tall people are fools. I mean, everybody knows like a goylem, like what's the word in English? Not a goylem. Golem. It's also it became an English word. But like a troll. Oath. A troll, an oath. What's it called? Oath. An oath. Oath with an F. Oath and a troll. These are like huge and generally speaking, the energy they give off is they're blunt. What's the word? They're bumbling, right? They're bumbling fools. So I think that's what he's talking about. I don't know any golems, but or oafs for that matter. So here he says, and he explains why. Because they're so incredibly tall. Whatever energies are necessary, and it's true even in our own current understanding of biology, the blood that's being pumped out by the heart that carries oxygen that's necessary to enable the brain to function, right? The blood-brain barrier is required to be able to bring the blood up to the mind and give the brain oxygen so that it can survive. But very tall people are going to have circulatory issues. They might have issues with blood clots. They might have issues because it's a big system, right? And they have to have a very strong heart to be able to pump blood all throughout the body. Says the Rebbe, because these people are so tall, so ha'ashanim ha'elu, he calls it smoke, vapors, but it's the oxygen that's carried by the blood. Nechlashim b'reiv haderech. They have to travel so far against gravity all the way up to the mind. It's a pella if you think about it. The heart.
It's true though.
Huh?
It's true.
What is?
I'm saying you have people who are extraordinarily high and big, who die young and everything else because of circulation issues. Yeah,
but I don't know that makes them dumb. Right? Like I don't know if that makes them ill. There is an element of truth to this. So you have to know, but the Rebbe says that it translates right into diminished brain power. What is certainly true is that yes, very large people have circulatory issues. That's for sure true, right? The question is what that then means. But the Rebbe writes, there's a huge derech between the heart and the mind, and machmas goyva kaimasam on account of their great height, Okay, this is where the Rebbe makes a bit of a leap, right? Therefore, they're not able to think as clearly, as properly, because it takes a very long time for the blood that's carrying the oxygen to go all the way up to the brain to allow it to function. And therefore, he says, Al pi roiv, I don't know, generally, but this is what he says.
What's bringing him to say this? Sorry, I missed it.
Yeah, we're going to get there in a minute. So he's just building a proof.
There's less oxygen there as well.
Yeah.
It's a joke.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So let's say we're talking about people as tall as that, okay? There you go. There is less oxygen outside and there's less oxygen inside. Therefore, no machshavos sichlius, well-baked thoughts are able to be produced. Okay? This is why very extremely tall people, according to Rabbi Nachman, are shaita. Now this is the aspect of the Darchei HaMoiri. She'ein lehem shum seichel. They have no seichel. Machmas, because the pasuk says, Ki gvoya arazim gavoy. Meaning the pasuk that made reference to the Amoiri, who are the center and the headquarters for Darchei HaMoiri, which is superstition, which is Avodah Zarah. That pasuk that refers to the Amoiri, right, who live in this way, makes direct reference to their height. Asher ki goyva arazim gavoy. What is the symbol for their incredible height? Arazim. What is one of the Kaylas that we want to subjugate in the aspect of the Rasha? We want to subjugate Kol, Ksil, B'Raiv Dvarim. What's a Ksil? A person who believes in everything. So that's the chain of concepts. They don't use the brain at all. They're all heart. There's no brain. They call them bleeding heart. All you have is a heart, which is important. We're going to see in a minute. The opposite. You need to have a heart, but you also have to have a brain. If a person wants to be a Baal Emunah and they don't want to use their seichel, all they want to have is their heart. They want to have what we called in the beginning of our Shir Mantaran and Dalid, Emunah without MS, right? They want to have a flame without a wick. It's going to end up mamish in kislos, in fali, in shtiyot. Mamish, right? We have to have a heart. We have to use our brain. Therefore, they believe in every myth. They believe in every shtus in the world. They don't use critical thinking. They use critical thinking. So nobody's saying that you should critically think your way to robotic, intellectualism and oblivion. A heart is necessary. A very, very important part of the human functionality is a heart. Very important, because we need the aspect of the adata hayoim. You need to have a heart. Otherwise, there'll be no emunah at all. But to only have a heart and not use a brain is the bechina of Darchei HaMoiri. Okay, so that's going to be counteracted by the symbol of the Eitz Erez. Erez is very tall. It comes to counteract Bidarchi Amoiri, who are the Bechina of Kigvoya Arazim Gavai, which is the Bechina of Pesi Yaman L'chol Davar, and that's Kol Ksil B'Reiv Dvarim. That's on the one hand. However, maybe even more, that's not, I can't say more, equally challenging, equally problematic, is Uktane Koima. People are very short. Oh, the heart is mamish, pumping, their whole system is full of blood. And they have a good brain. But because their intellect is more developed than their good acts, their good deeds, a person who's chachma transcends their actions, so they're not actually acting properly, but in their mind they know all these amazing things. When the mind returns back and the energy comes back to the heart, their heart cannot contain the intellect, because the way to strengthen the heart is through Maisim Tovim. It doesn't show that a person has a good heart because they sat and they learned per se. Even though that itself could be an act of great love, as the Medrash Tanchumim Parshas Noach, it's really a must-read, teaches us, right, that the Iker Avas Hashem is learning Torah Sheba'al Peh in a certain sense, right, if it's done right. But generally speaking, when we call that's a good person, a warm person, it's because of his maisim, not because of his intellect. It's because he's a bal chesed. It's because he's a humble person. It's because he's compassionate. It's because he cares about others. Because that shows that a person has a leiv tov. Person might have a good brain, but it's detached from a good heart. So here he says you can have people who have a very strong heart, who have a very strong mind, but the heart is very weak. They seek to acquire chachma, but they don't have a leiv. And therefore, on account of the seichel, they're actually machtiim. That actually brings them to sin. And he says, these are the philosophers. They sit and they contemplate and they think about ethics, but when you look at their actual personal lives, the infidelities and the lowliness and the kiur, and they write highfalutin beautiful things about morality and wonderful things, and they sit and they contemplate what is good, what is a good way. But then you look at the actual toitzais, they're not in the aspect of, in my heart, I guarded imrasecha so that I don't come to sin. It's the opposite. On account of the seichel, because they didn't bring it into their leiv, that causes them to sin even more. And they are the aspect of another pasuk in Malachim Aleph, pasuk Hey, parak Hey, Eizov hayotzei bakir, little grasses that emerge from the wall. Ezov zebachinas ktane koima. The Ezov represents the small size, right? Because it's very lowly grass, which we said is the opposite of the Erez, which are shoitim. He says, Himbali seichel. No, they have a good seichel. But they don't have a heart that's capable of grasping, of really integrating that seichel. Their heart is weak. This is the worst. And I just mentioned infidelities. If you look at the biographies of some of the great philosophers, the affairs that they had, how unfaithful they were, right? They didn't live, they didn't practice, they weren't tzaddikim. Even if they wrote great things on the level of what kind of people they were, this is what the Rebbe is talking about. They're adulterers. And they're oiskim chachmas philosophy. Right? This is what they had. They're big philosophers. And they may even come up with wondrous, incredibly deep and real seichel. But I want to know, how did they live, though? That's what made our tzaddikim great. Right? It was not the svarim they wrote and the teachings they taught. It was how they lived. That's what we want to know. How did they live? That's what makes a person a tzaddik. It's not how much Torah they know. They know a lot of Torah. The question is, how were they in their lived experience? Did they have ma'asim tovim? Says the Rebbe, Shema'oid ma'oid mazik lahem. For these particular people, an intellectual obsession made their lave that needed a lot of strengthening, it made it much worse for them. Ki libam chaser, because they ended up with no lave. They didn't have a lave chazak that was going to enable them to do what was right, to act in the right way. Bebechinas noy eif isha, pasuk in Mishlei, a person who is an adulterer, it means chaser lave. There's something deficient in the heart. Might be a big intellectual. Something's missing on the level of their ma'asim tovim. Here, what the Rebbe is doing is he is drawing a contrast to what he just introduced us to a few minutes ago. What was the problem before? Is that all you have is seichel, and all you have is lave rather, and you don't have seichel. And that turns into darchei amoiri, very dangerous, right? Too much emunah. Here, it's the opposite. You have too much seichel and too little lave, and you'll never find a remez in anything, right? Again, this is a classic Rabbi Nachman model where he wants always to bring us to balance, right? We see this again and again and again and again and again and again. This is the central theme, kipshutai, right? The central theme of the Sefer, which is the central theme of Yiddishkeit, is the Sefer. Is just to bring all of the different dichotomies, all the different dialectics, and to teach us how to integrate all of them. And he's very sober-minded about the challenges on either end of the spectrum, which, like I told you before in the past, oftentimes when people are having arguments about hashkafa, you can usually split the hairs to the point where you say it's not really a fundamental machlokes. It's just this one is stressing that side and that one is stressing this side. And what we need to do is to mediate. What does the word mediate mean? It comes from the word medium, right? The middle, the median. What we need to do is to help this one see that one's perspective, to help that one see this one's perspective, and in so doing, you actually bring them closer to each other where they could see, whoa, we weren't on opposite sides of the spectrum. We agree fundamentally. It's just I was afraid of that liability, which is on the extreme of your side, right? You were afraid of my liability, the liability that is the extreme on my side, and let's just both admit, wow, this is going to be a narrow road. This is a geshet sar ma'od, and right, we need to find a happy medium to be able to mitigate both by anchoring ourselves in nuance, by anchoring ourselves in balance, and that's exactly what the Rebbe is doing over here, as you're going to see in just another minute. So says the Rebbe, that's the b'chin of noyaf isha chasalev. That's the big issue here. Erez-Eizov-Shni Tolaas, and that's the pasuk of Malachim, little grasses that are growing out of the kir. Hainu b'kiras halev. Kiras halev is a lashon that you find in the Gemara with regard to tefillah. Tefillah comes from the walls of the heart. Eizu avodah shavalev havi aimer zu tefillah. Sha'aseichel yoytze derech kiras halev, because the walls of this person's heart are not strong enough, and memela it's leaking out all the seichel. The seichel doesn't ever come down to the heart. It doesn't enable them to become humble. It doesn't enable them to open up their eyes to recognize the meaning that exists in this world, to recognize the ar that exists in this world, to recognize that there's mamish remazim that Hashem is sending him. For that you need a lave. If you have too much seichel and too little lave, you'll never see any remez ever. The lave is not able to contain the seichel, which is what David HaMelech was indeed able to do by having a strong enough heart to be able to take the seichel imrasecha and bring it down, so that leman layachdalach, that didn't bring him to sin. This comes to counteract the kol anois anoichi shemea kol cherufim v'gidufim shemegantvin klapi mala b'chachmasam. This is not referring to a person getting shamed, that we're going to see in a minute. This is referring to a lack of emunah. Shemegantvin klapi mala b'chachmasam. That's what was happening when Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the luchos and he said kol anois anoichi shemea. He heard the Shechitah-Sreifah, and that was that was a lack of emunah. Why? Why was that a lack of emunah? Because what we're learning over here is that's the bechina of too much seichel, too little lave. About them it says, yes, it's great, you have a beautiful brain. That's not the goal. You weren't sent into this world to intellectualize everything literally to death, because you'll live in a world that's dead. You need to have a heart. But you weren't either sent down to have such a heart that you don't use the seichel. Both. You need the seichel, which is the bechina of emes. You need the heart, which is the bechina of emunah. Emes ve'emunah kol zos. If you have one and not the other on either end of it, we're not on either of those camps, right? And we have to always try as best as we can to clarify this for ourselves, so that the opinions that we take share the nuance, right? That we want to argue for what we believe is deficient without giving off the impression that what we're arguing for is all we need, right? Because we're going to need the spectrum. That's what we're arguing for, right? That we should have this balance. We should have this inclusionary energy that brings all the different forces together in a beautiful harmony in the Tiferes. And here we come to the third one, Shni Tolaas, and that's the bechina of Shni Tolaas. Zev Klein kol shlishi. This is the aspect of the third and final voice. Where a person is attacked by people who are shaming them and hurting them. All the whole day, klimasi negdi, my shame is opposite me. Ubaishas panai kisasni, and my face is covered in shame. Mikol mecharif umegadev. On account of those who are shaming me. V'zeu Tolaas shani. This is the aspect of the scarlet string. What's the aspect of Tolaas? Means a string, but it's also bechinas va'anoichi Tolaas v'lo ishakamino worm. David HaMelech says, on account of the way that they were treating me, I felt like a worm and not a human. Cherapas adam uvuzui am. I was a person who was shamed by the nation. And that's the inyan of the Tolaas. You could also say scarlet, because the Gemara says when a person is ashamed, right, their face turns chivra sumka, right, turns red and white and red and white. So this is the aspect of the Tolaas. Okay? So it's counteracting these three Kaylas that we're trying in terms of the collective spirit of Ra that we want to subjugate. Rasha b'chfrat, Rasha b'chlal, which is the bechina, like we learned of para aduma, tmima, right, that whole inyan. And we have to daven about that in the bechina of afar ve'efer in order to counteract these three specific revelations of Ra'ayin, which, like we learned, number one, is the bechina of kol ksil. That means way too much heart and way too little brain. That's one element of Ra'ayin, where I can approach the world and it's unhealthy, right? Because I go beyond the boundaries of regular Amunah and I become some crazy conspiracy theorist who you could go out of your mind like that. We all know people, right? You could go mamish ice mensch from this kind of thinking, right? That's dark emori, that's way too much, not healthy at all. And that's one kind of kol from the bechina of Ra'ayin that we need to counteract. And the way that we do that is with the symbol of the eight Erez, which is Gvai Kaima, who are the Ksilim. Then we have the opposite, which is bechina of the philosophers, which is an aspect of too much brain and too little heart, where they have all the emes in the world, but they have very little emunah maisim tovim. That's the bechina of those who are short, right? So it's functioning, it's working, but their lave doesn't have enough strength to be able to integrate the wisdom. That's the bechina of Ezov. And then finally we have the third one, which is shame, which is just stam cynicism. Bizyonis charafis misainim. And that's a third kind of challenge that a person will experience. Or even if perhaps you can suggest they have the right balance, but they're going to be shamed away from being able to engage in it properly. This is what the Shulchan Aruch begins with right in the beginning, right? That a person needs to what's the word lashon? Al yiro maybe mipnei maligim alav, right? That a person shouldn't be ashamed. The person should be a gibar kari, right? And ratz katzvi, to do the ratz and avinu shebashamayim. That even if a person is surrounded by a whole culture, right, that's making them feel like they're wasting their time, I'm the only yid in the world, doesn't matter, right? I have my balance. I know what I represent. I know what it means to be a yid. That this is the aspect that we're trying to work on, balance, the bechina of chesed to the one hand and gevura to the other hand, bringing it together in tiferes. I need my brain. I also need my heart. I need my heart. I also need my brain. And then once I have this balance, you stand up strong and tall. And that's the bechina of the Tolaas Shani, which comes to represent the shame, the Meechal, Mecharef, and Megadev, to counteract this element. These are the three symbols that we want to burn, right? I mean, we want to destroy these three inyanim, which is one extreme, the other extreme, and then the challenge against the balance in the middle. We want to burn it together with the Afar Apara, which is the bechina of Tefillah. Afar Efer, want to bring all of it up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be Mesakin, the inyan of Tumas Meis, which we're learning here is associated with the inyan of Mitzayra, because that's what Lashon Hara is. It could kill a person, right? That's the Chaim B'Hamaves Biyad HaLashon, like the pasuk says. Chaim and Maves is Biyad HaLashon. Lashon Hara is Ra'ayin. That's what we learned in Torah and Dalit. These two things, the Mitzayra and the Tamei Meis, it's one bechina, and that's why the purification of both is going to include these elements. But over here, we want to subjugate them legamri, so we take them and we burn them.
Two types of boishas, because I mean, we can cut our lachas. I feel he's been talking about how important it is to have boishas from the Itzes and another boishas and conduct things with that. Of
course, that's different. Yeah, boishas in that sense is a holy boishas. That's a boishas mipnei Hashem, not mipnei others.
This is not to be embarrassed of other people.
Of other people. No, you have to stand up strong. Adarabah, you know what they're embarrassing you about? Your embarrassment before Hashem, right? And they're going to come and challenge you. What? There's nothing. There's no reason. There's no purpose for any of this. So
it's like a self-worth type of boishas, this, and that is none other.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's carry on. Zehu, and this is pshat in Shechitah-Sreifah-Asifah Hanemer B'Para. But when it comes to para aduma, you needed these three things, right? The para aduma was shechted, and then the para was burnt, right? It turned into ashes, afar and efer, and then asifah, and then they were all gathered together, and they brought it out of the camp into a makam tar. Okay, these three steps that were done with the para aduma. So says the Rebbe, what does it come to represent? Shehim shloisha bechinas elu. They represent these three inyanim. Number one, shchita. Zeh bechinas bittul emunas ksila. Shchita means counteracting darchei amayri. We have to shechtit bechinas the pasuk in Yeshעיהו, v'shachata seitim ha'emiku, which on a literal level means seitim, which means those who moved away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, those who are not wandering, moving away from, losing my words today. Every time I come to the end of the week, I'm just, departing, no. Straying. Yeah, those who are stray, Satan means to stray. Those who are straying after idol worshippers, he'emiku v'shachata, right? They're busy shechting karbanis to all of the different mythical forces that they believe in without really giving it any thought as to how, what is worth believing in, what is not worth believing in. That's darchei amayri. Okay, so we want to get rid of that, and that's the inyan of shechting, to counteract their shechting to imaginary forces. That counteracts darchei amayri, too much heart, too little mind. Sreifa, burning, this comes to strengthen the heart. This comes to rectify too much brain and too little heart, so that the heart should be able to hold all of the seichel. You need fire in your heart. When the seichel comes down into the heart, it inflames the heart, but that's the tachlis. Not that the intellect should shut down the heart. The intellect should inspire the heart. It should guide the heart, but the ikr is the heart. Like the pasuk that we quoted says, V'yadata hayoyim, but that's only step one. What's the purpose then? Bring it down into maisim. Lo yalimru ha'ikr ela hamaisim. That's the ikr. The ikr is the lave. And that's cham libi bekirbi. You want that your lave should be illuminated. It's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. It doesn't quote it here, but that's the paraphrase. The seichel should be ke'esh atzur. It should be like a guarded fire. V'zeu sreifa. And this is the aspect of sreifa, which comes to counteract the philosophers, which is too much brain, too little heart. And then finally, va'asifah. Asifah, the gathering together of the ashes. This comes to counteract the experience of being ashamed by those who are haters, right? In the colloquial sense, those people who come against everything that's holy and good, and people who are just full of cynicism and denial. Asaf Elokim Escharpasi. When Yosef Atzadik was born, so Rochel says, Asaf Elokim Escharpasi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has gathered in my shame, right? Because now she was nifkad by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, she was remembered, she was able to bring a child into the world, and that's Asaf Elokim Escharpasi. You see that Asifah is counteracting shame, Zeh B'chinas Bittul Kol Shlishi, and that comes to counteract the Kol Shlishi, which is the aspect of the Kol Mecharef Umegadef. Unbelievable, right? These are the Ramazim of Paraduma. These things, right? Erez-Eizov and Tolaas Shani, that are themselves counteracted by Shechitah-Sreifah-Asifah. Says the Hillig Rebbe Isayin. This is wild. I mean, this whole Torah is wild, but this paragraph is really, really just mamish remarkable. Let's see if we can get through it before the end. Every person who davens needs to fix up all these three things. Number one, we need to daven for those and for those parts of ourselves, right? Like we learned, that are falling into emunas kaizviyas. We need to bring them back into seichel. We need to make sure that we walk the straight and narrow, not to get lost in rabbit holes of beliefs of kinds. You have to know where the boundary is. We say ad kan, and I can't look for meaning in every. I'll go crazy. I'll go mamish out of my mind, right? I don't know why we're quoting movies the whole time, but there's a movie that I remember from the old days called A Beautiful Mind. Russell Crowe. It's a phenomenal film. Phenomenal. It was my favorite. Maybe it still is. Wink, wink. And phenomenal film. And the whole thing over there is a brilliant mathematician who becomes a schizophrenic, and he just starts imagining patterns and meaning everywhere. He mamish becomes and he's running away from the government. There's nobody there, Bechlal. There's nobody. It's all in his brain. It's a pachad noira. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that they actually show that film in universities. People are studying psychiatry. It's like part of the curriculum, because just get into the mind of that's what can happen. A person who goes, you can mamish lose touch with reality, right? Now, who's right and who's wrong? What's reality? Of course, there's a reality of meaning, but you have to know how to engage with that in a healthy, appropriate way. Otherwise, you destroy your life. That's Darchei HaMoiri. It's a bechina, right, of Darchei HaMoiri. So the first thing is we need to daven for those people. We want them to have emunah, but it should be emunah amitiyah. She tefillah, because tefillah itself, like we learned in Torah Beis, embodies balance. You remember we learned over there that you need, to have a cherev that doesn't go too much to the right. I think you wrote a whole Indian about this, right? And doesn't go too much to the left. It's a cherev pifia. So that mamish in Torah Beis, it has to be a double-edged sword, which itself was building on what we learned in Torah Aleph about you need the nun, which is this world, which is malchus, in order to access the ches. If all you have is ches, it's going to be way too much. It's the same Indian. It just keeps on coming back again and again and again. You need to have the balance, and that's what we learned in Torah Beis. Why tefillah? Because tefillah makes this big problem. On the one hand, there are two reasons a person won't daven. Number one is that I don't need to daven. I can do everything myself. That's too much bechira, and we're just reviewing. And on the other hand, a person can say, what do I need to daven? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking care of everything anyway. Right? Everything's Hashem. What does he need? And then a person will never daven because that's too much yediyah. We learned that in order to, the act of davening necessitates already having a balance of both. Because if I have too little of either, I'm not davening, right? Davening already means that I have the balance. Because it means, yes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows everything. And yes, everything until this moment unfolded precisely as it was supposed to, and I don't come to challenge anything. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu also made me a human being with needs and wants, and he wants me to articulate them as best as I know how to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We learned over there, Yi'u l'ratzon, we say at the end of Tefillah, after expressing all the things that we think we need, that we feel that we need, we say, Yi'u l'ratzon emefi v'hegel libi, and then we say, Lefanecha, Hashem, now I'm taking everything I daven for, and I'm putting it in front of you, and now you're going to be the one to decide. That's Tefillah, that's the balance, you need both. So we want to bring the people who are in Darchei HaMoiri into our tefillah. In other words, we want, in our davening, which is itself representative of balance, then those people who are imbalanced should have the help that they need, right? Should be able to be brought into this experience of balance. They shouldn't waste their time. They should be brought into this aspect of emuna amitis. Shehiyat tefillah, v'likvaya b'liba emuna shlema. We want to fix them up. And then we're also davening, and again, it's for others, but it's for us. It's for the parts within ourselves. We have to daven for the philosophers. We have to daven for the so-called rationalists, right, who are so stuck in their brain that they'll never taste the sweetness of emunah. They're so stuck in liberating whether the Zohar is authentic or not, and they're writing and reading academic articles that they'll never once taste one spark of art. Their whole thing is like, we should believe this, shouldn't believe it. Just open the book, like the Baal HaSulam says. Whoever wrote it was a Tana. Like I said last night in Shir, whoever wrote it was a Tana. That's not the point, right? Is it authentic or not based on whether or not it was written by a Tana? It's authentic because look at it, right? That's how you know. Not. It's because look at it, because it's a Giloi Ar Atzum, but it takes emunah, it takes a certain humility, it takes a sweetness. Otherwise, a person will be stuck and they'll walk around their whole life mocking everybody else who's mamash in Gan Eden, and the only thing that we want is that they should taste what we taste, but they'll never taste it. Are they koifrim? The Ramak addresses this in Paradise Reminding right in the beginning. Is a person a koifer if he doesn't believe in the spheres? He's mamash kfira? He says no. But he says we could say about such a person, Paradise is over there, but I know it. He says we can say about such a person, Loi Ra'u Ayres Miyamav. That person, we can accurately say, it might not be a kaifer, we can say he has never seen light all his days. Or he hasn't seen. We have to daven for people. They should taste the sweetness and the chachma that we perceive, the way that it opens up the whole Torah, the whole Yiddishkeit, the mitzvahs, ma'asim time, everything. We have to daven that they should be able to taste it also. They should have a lave. They should have not just emes. They should have emunah. That shouldn't cause them to sin. They should be in the aspect of my heart has absorbed the wisdom so that they're able to live lives of maisim tovim, not just of rationality and sophistication. And that's through our kavanas halev we can fix up their lave. And the third element is to take all of the shame that we feel and somehow we turn that into kavod. We turn the shame into kavod. How's that magic trick done? Says the Rebbe, phenomenal mashal. A very deep mashal. Very, very deep. When a person stands in the chamber of the king, in the throne room, you're standing there in the dignity of a king, you lose your own sense of self. All there is the king. Not just out of fear, out of love, out of grandeur, out of I'm batal mavutal. There's nothing else. All he sees around him is the hispashtus of the ruach of this king, of the dignity of the king. If he hears somebody coming in and embarrassing him, somehow his brain can't understand this, but somehow he interprets this bizayan as Vaitar, part of the covet of the Melech. Because this place, everything that happens in this place is covered for the king. I could understand it, I can't understand it. I know that they would not allow somebody into this place unless somehow it was bringing covet to the king. Even though I'm not able to understand it very well, I know that it was for an advantage. I don't know how. Somebody comes in, he starts embarrassing the king. This person's mind is so batal and mavutal to the covet of the king that the bizayon becomes Vaitar, part of the covet of the king, even though the rational mind can't grasp how. For some reason, the king orchestrated this, because all there is in this place is the glory of the king. So even that which appears to be counteracting the king's glory is Vaitar, the glory of the king. How could it be that authentically, genuinely, in a bona fide sense, somebody's going to come into the throne room and begin to be mevazeh the melech? Obviously, it's just we're not able to understand how. These diburim are diburei kavod. It has to be. So then the work is contemplate the diburim, figure out how to be mitzaref them, figure out how to interpret them in such a way that you should be able to see them as being part and parcel of the covet of the king. And to be able to think, oh, no, wait, maybe it's not said about the king. Maybe it's said actually about me. It can't be. We said his whole Yeshus is in his battle. He doesn't exist. There is no me. So the charafas of his yonis, anyway, they're not even coming against me because I don't exist. They're against the king. But it can't be against the king mamish because everything here is covered for the melech. The seder, so the charaf and the bizyonis is weiter covered for the melech. Do you hear this? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable the way that the Rebbe... There is nothing here but the king. And that's the level of consciousness the Rebbe wants to take us to. All we see is the king, and I don't exist because me myself, I'm part of the covet of the melech. So somebody who comes and ashames me, not only isn't shaming me, he's shaming the melech. He's not even shaming the melech because nobody here could shame the melech. It's part of the covet of the melech. We can't understand how, but this is a klal barzel. Nothing here is outside of the covet of the king. Listen to the way he reads this into a pasuk. With this we'll finish. V'zehu, and this is pshat, ubehechalai. And when a person is in the consciousness of recognizing this whole world, this whole reality is within the Mekayim Shel Olam, is the bechina of the Heichal HaMelech, kulai aimer, covered. No matter what anybody says, every kind of dibur, kulai aimer, is covered. Kol ha'amiris tzarich litzarfam le'eshavos mehem kavod. I have to find the kavod of a Kadosh Baruch Hu in everything. Ub'shas hatfila adam oimid be'Heichal HaMelech. And when a person davens, they're literally in the Heichal HaMelech. V'b'chinas adni safasai tiftach. That's why we begin our tefillah with this pasuk. Adni, of course, is gematria Heichal. Adni is a Heichal. It becomes the chamber for the Shem Yud Kevavke. It goes inside Aleph Dal Nun Yud, which is why when we want to say Yud Kevavke, we say Aleph Dal Nun Yud. B'chein tzarich lasis min kol b'zyonis tzurifik kavod la'melech. Therefore, a person comes into Shemona Esrei. Somebody slighted their kavod. They're going through something on a self-worth level. Right now, you're in Heichal HaMelech. Right now, there's nothing but the king. If there's nothing but the king, then there's no bizyonis, because there's no me. And so the bizyon was to the king, because I don't exist, and it cannot be bizyon, because there's nothing here but kavod HaMelech. When I'm able to enter into tefillah in this way, I'm mesakin these three things. Number one, I'm mesakin the kol mecharav u'megadev. It doesn't get in my way. All there is Eibishter. What does he say? Ein kan ela hamelech ba'atzmei. There's nothing but the melech. That's A. B, I'm using my tefillah balance to be able to go ahead and help the Darchei HaMoiri that are to such an extreme that they're lacking intellect, and we're able to bring that into our tefillah. And number three, we are able to rectify those people who have so much intellect that they don't have any leiv, and that's the avodah shebeleiv of tefillah. This is the way that tzaddik, who's davening in the bechina of afar ve'efar on account of an nishalma parim savasena, which is para aduma tamima, is able to go ahead and rectify the three koilos, which is the aspect of Erez-Eizov-Shni Tolaas. Baruch should help us be Mekayim at least a little bit of this in some small way. What a privilege. And B'chazdei Hashem, just want to say that great things are happening for this Likutei series. Siyata D'Shmaya managed to find a phenomenal partner for this going forward, and we're going to be able to spend a lot of time on the transcripts and continue the shir in Eretz Yisrael, B'chol Tokef, and even more. And I just want to be expressing Shevach V'Haidah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One day I'll tell you the whole story that started over a decade ago in Hashkacha Nifla'a V'Atzuma for bringing me to this point. And of course, a huge Shevach V'Haidah to this remarkable partner that I've been zeichet to partner with. And we're going to do great things for Klal Yisrael together. So it's a Besura Toiva, like in the most incredible way. Godspeed. Onward to the Gula. Okay. Thank you. Monday, let's do a quick vote. Let's do it.
אני הבן ואתה האב שלי שכל כך אוהב אותי האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני